Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. Tonight we'll be discussing the Final Destination franchise, which debuted at the turn of the century with little fanfare and no major star power. New Line Cinema proceeded to crank out 5 installments over the next dozen years, with death itself inheriting the mantle from such classic movie murderers as Freddy, Jason, Michael, or Ghostface. With a fantastic and repeatable formula, the franchise reinvigorated the body count movie to the tune of $700 million worldwide.
I got this feeling. It's a weird feeling.
The cabin starts to shake, right? And the left side blows up and then the whole plane just explodes. The plane's gonna explode! It's not a joke! It's not a joke!
We get thrown off the plane all because Brownie has a bad dream?
I saw it.
The plane! It's gonna blow up! It's gonna blow up!
All 287 passengers are feared dead.
Because of you, I'm still alive.
In death, there are no accidents. No coincidences. And no escapes.
Did it happen again? Did you see Todd die?
What if it was our time? What if we were not meant to get off that plane? What if there is a design, then it's not finished?
By walking off the plane, you're cheating death. You have to figure out when it's coming back at you.
What are you, God now?
He knows which one of us is next.
You have a responsibility to tell me.
I knew I should have hit on Tammy in the pool that time.
I'm not gonna let it happen, okay?
Nobody has control over life and death unless they are taking lives and causing death. Now, can you promise me that no one else is going to die?
I'll see you soon.
Check all your electrical appliances, look both ways before crossing the street, and for God's sake, don't spill anything. It's Final Destination, celebrating its 25th anniversary, and we've got an amazing panel to chat about it with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Mike Mayo.
Greetings.
Ashley Lamers.
Hello.
Frank Merle.
Hello, happy to be here.
Vanessa Morgan, beaming in from Belgium.
Hello.
And Ciara Wylie.
Oh, hey, Aaron. Sorry, just doing a little light reading.
And we are here to chat about Final Destination from 2000, followed by the other Final Destination movies, Final Destination 2 from 2003, Final Destination 3 from 2006, The Final Destination from 2009, and Final Destination 5 from 2011. And we will be talking spoilers, so just prepare yourselves, everybody. Thanks for coming on the show and welcome. Mike, I mentioned backstage how pleased I was to see you on this panel because you usually handle the classic stuff. And then I realized this movie's 25 years old, so it's not really that recent.
Isn't that horrifying? It is so old. I remember when this came out, I was doing a radio show and remember that we had a really fun time talking about this one. I was kind of the only person involved with the show who's really into horror movies. And this one, to me, just kind of hit all the bases. I loved the humor of it, just the snarkiness, the way it just kept going and going, and never got sweet when you thought it was going to. And I was really happy to have a chance to go back, look at them again for this panel. And I realized I had not seen the fifth one. I'd completely missed that until now. So really fun to talk about it too.
So we closed the circuit for you. That's good. We closed the loop. That's kind of the theme of these movies, right?
Yeah.
Ashley, how about you?
I have no memory of watching the first one for the first time, but I know I saw that one at some point after it first came out, and then I didn't see 2 or 3 until 100 years later. But I remember going to see the 4th one in the theater because that was the 3D stuff. So I remember seeing that one in the theater.
Do you remember your reaction to the first one?
I remember loving it. I remember having the wildest crush on Devon Sawa. So I was always there to watch whatever he was in. That's probably how I originally saw it, was he was attached.
Frank, how about you?
My memory of the first movie has a lot to do with Tony Todd. In fact, I'm wearing my Candyman shirt today. And one of the reasons I really, really wanted to be on this panel, because I was, Candyman was like my favorite horror movie when I was a teenager. And so anything he was in, I was going to go see. And of course he has 2 minutes in the first movie, one scene, 2 minutes in the second movie. Again, closed the circuit with his triumphant return in 5. But I always love these movies for the reasons that I think other people love them. So original, the fun, creative deaths. And so they've just been really memorable for me. I think I saw all 5 in theaters and had not seen them again until prepping for this panel. So it was a really fun revisit for me.
Awesome. Vanessa.
I watched the first one in the cinema, actually, in 2000 when it came out. I had no clue whatsoever what it was going to be about. I just noticed there's a new horror movie, so I have to watch it, obviously. And I really adored it. And also the plane crash from the beginning, it absolutely terrified me back then. To a point that I was thinking I'm never going to sit in a plane again. But just a fun fact, I rewatched it a couple of months ago in a plane.
That's good. Now, next time you need to watch Final Destination 2 while you're driving in the car, 3 on the roller coaster. Ciara, I just recently became aware of your love for this series when we were at your Deep Cuts horror trivia here in Chicago. Tell us your introduction and why you love it so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So I saw the first Final Destination movie back when when HBO was a channel on your cable, and they would just show the same 3 or 4 movies over and over and over again. That's how I saw the first Final Destination movie. And I was a kid with really bad anxiety. So Final Destination became my major comfort film, actually. It was it stuck with me, not because it scared me. It was it became a huge comfort thing for me. So I immediately loved the film. As the rest of the films came out, I kind of came back to the series later, after most of the movies had already come out. They stuck so much in my head. I'm a huge fan of the 5th one, and they kind of became my go-to feel-good movies, oddly enough.
Yeah, it was funny because I actually was having a little anxiety in the kitchen this morning after having watched all of these films. I'm like, no, the world is a dangerous place. That's what these movies teach you. Mm-hmm. I never saw any of these in the theater. I would watch them pretty religiously as they came out and became available on video. And then I did a big marathon probably back in 2018. I was doing a theater play out of town, and I gathered my cast and crew together, and we just sat and mowed through all 5 of them. And again, everybody had a great time. And what's interesting is that my wife, when I told her the premise for the Final Destination movie, she's like, how is that fun? Everybody dies and then they die again. I'm like, yep. And there's nothing they can do about it. That's right. Yep. She's like, I don't understand you. And she left the room. So thank you all for being here with me as folks who, quote, get it. Because I think these movies are hilarious and fun and delightful in the way that only horror films can be.
Absolutely.
But let's talk about what is it about these films that makes it fun. We just did a recent panel on slashers, and I think that is another one that kind of taps into that same thing of watching a bunch of people die, but somehow that's enjoyable. So anybody want to take a stab at why these films are exciting and fun?
Part of it, I think, is we set up at the beginning of all of them the good characters and the bad characters. And so we're kind of rooting for the bad characters to get it, but at the same time, we're on the side of the good characters and trying to keep them alive. And let me take 1 second to say, I have never seen one of these with a really big crowd. And I think in a theater with a big crowd of, fellow appreciative fans, it would be a whole different experience and a lot more fun. And I have to admit, I haven't done that.
I'll jump in and say, I think it's is it 4 or 5 that has the movie theater explosion?
4.
Is it 4? Yeah. That was fun. I'm sitting in a crowded theater with the where you're seeing this the 3D, and I saw it in 3D. And there's this explosion scene, like people are looking around, like what's going to happen here? That was a lot of fun. Obviously, that was designed, but part of the fun for me, because to compare it to slashers, there is no bad guy. That's what's really interesting to me. Some people interpret death as being, like I've seen descriptions of these films that say, oh, it's a Rube Goldberg device. I don't think of it that way. A lot of the deaths are just the things that could happen, these everyday occurrences. Don't mix water and electricity, right? That's what's really unique. It's not until the 5th one that when there's a real villain who says, I'm gonna kill everybody and get all your extra years. Prior to that, the series never had a traditional bad guy. There's jerks who you're rooting to see them get theirs, but that's something that's really, really unique, is that all horror films tap into something that we're afraid of. Well, slashers, okay, there might be a maniac out there with a knife after me, but it's the relatability, right, of each of these deaths where you go, oh, I've been in that situation. Or, I'm sure we'll bring up the classic Final Destination 2 with the logs, right? Everybody's seen that meme, right, where people will take pictures, every time you're on the road and you see that truck, people think of Final Destination, right? And so that's something that is really unique, something that these movies tapped into. You talked about, the fear of flying, right? So all these disasters that could happen, life is a dangerous thing. That's what makes these movies so unique.
And also, did you know that every opening scene of every film is loosely based, and of course, upon a real event? Mm-hmm. That makes it really relatable.
Oh, no. Was there a NASCAR disaster where cars flew into the? Oh no!
Of course,
every Sunday.
Not every single detail, but it is every single time inspired by something real.
Wow.
Yeah, I think for me, I would jump in and just say, I think the other thing, and this is what makes these movies such a kind of comfort film to me, and what really stuck with me as a person who has really bad anxiety, is that the big thing about the Final Destination films is that they're not about choice. And I think that's what it was for me, especially Final Destination 3 kind of has this theme of trying to assert control. But the films tell you in the very beginning that everyone's going to die. That's the premise of the movie, is that there's no getting out of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of one thing about these films that are so unique and why they stuck with me so much, is it's not about anything you do. And that's kind of another thing that I think people connect with is, it's not because you got on the plane. Maybe getting on the plane is actually what saves you from this other death. Maybe getting off the plane causes your death. At the end of the day, you don't have to worry about what you're doing and whether it's going to lead to some horrible fate. It's going to happen no matter what.
You know what? Something's going to get me. We'll see what it is.
I think that's the thing that makes it not comfortable for me.
As Tony Todd said, all part of death's sadistic design.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's just it. We can't begin to figure out what that might be. Mm-hmm. And yet we watch 5 films where people try and figure it out. And they go, and I think that's what I love about this series, is how kind of formulaic it is, mm-hmm. and yet manages to deliver in that regard every single time. You're going through the order in which people die. It starts off with the big whatever accident, and then you backtrack your way through it. I love the inexplicable visions that people get. It's so they have this deep, comprehensive vision of something that occurs, and they've never had that before or since. And it happens 5 times over the course of this series. So I love that.
Mm-hmm. And also, there is never a dull moment in these films. So
Right.
it is formulaic, but it works because the rhythm is there. There's always something happening. And when you know that one death is done, you know that the next one is coming in a few minutes. So,
That idea of them not being boring, I think, is really interesting because it really does, even though it's a formula, what's different are the ingredients, right? We're going to find different ways for people to expire. And I love the fact that each one does have a very specific opening disaster movie, type of situation that is fully exploited. And kind of to your point, Frank, it's things that we've already imagined. We're driving down the highway, we see the truck full of whatever. And I mean, for me, it's the cars. Like when trucks are pulling like all the cars on the trailer, I'm like one of those is going to come loose and we're all doomed. But being at a racetrack, being at a carnival where the roller coaster goes nuts, these are things we've already imagined, and that's what the fear is. And this is a way to experience it, kind of like the whole thing with horror movies, a way to experience it in a safe way.
They really vary the pacing of the deaths as well, too, which is another thing that kind of maintains that level of interest. You have your deaths that take 10 minutes to play out that are like the Rube Goldberg. And then later in the series, sometimes you've got, you have a death in the fourth one, which is literally just a rock hits a woman in the head, she dies.
Right.
That's it.
And I do love that one because we do have that big buildup in the hair salon where we see all of the things that could happen, and then none of them ends up being the one that takes her out.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I like about the franchise is that the death is coming and you know it, but they keep teasing you about how it's going to happen or what part is going to be the thing. I don't know. I think that's part of the fun too.
Well, let's go ahead and start at the start, back with Final Destination, the original from 2000. It came from a story idea by Jeffrey Reddick. It was originally, I think, as an X-Files episode is what they were talking about. And then they decided, James Wong and Glenn Morgan decided they wanted to try to make it into a feature film. The premise is that we got Flight 180. I should let you do this, Ciara. Would you set up the premise for Final Destination?
The premise is loosely based on a real-life disaster, which is TWA Flight 800, in which a young man with his French class is traveling on a plane to go on a school trip to France, and he has a premonition that the plane is going to explode and kill everyone on board. This is a very detailed premonition. He sees the order in which it happens. He sees the way everyone around him dies. And then he essentially wakes up and he's back on the plane. And so he causes a scene, a commotion. Several people get off the plane as a result. And for the rest of the film, we watch as Death tries to reassert its original plan by killing those people one at a time.
And as Ashley pointed out, Evan Sawa is our lead. And we have Ali Larder as Clear Rivers, which I always love that name. And speaking of names, all of these characters in this first film are named after famous horror film directors, with the exception of Ms. Rivers,
please,
and Carter Horton, are kind of our mean jock guy. Do we have any reason as to why he's Horton as opposed to any of the other horror film directors?
I don't know why he's Carter Horton. Clear Rivers, I believe, was actually named after the hometown of one of the members of the crew.
Okay.
So there is an origin story for hers. Carter, I'm not sure actually.
Because that was one. It was like it's funny how the horror film director names popped out at me, and then Horton. I'm like, who's Horton? And I'm like scanning IMDb. I'm like, who's Horton? Is there a famous Horton that I'm missing out on? But I cannot find it. So if anybody does know, please throw it in the comments. This film, for my money, takes the premise pretty seriously. And the deaths, I think, are, with the exception of Val Lewton's death at home, which is a little more, as we were saying, Rube Goldberg. And for those who don't know what Rube Goldberg is, she was somebody who came up with the idea of a very circuitous route of accomplishing a simple task. So kind of like the game Mousetrap, where you would do this ball would go over here, it would tip this thing, and it would end up pushing a cup out. Again, a very, very complicated route to a very simple task.
You also ought to mention the part of the first one that really gets to me every time is the repeated references to John Denver. And and how, he just becomes this meme going through the whole movie. And every time John Denver shows up, or you hear him, you know something's about to happen.
Yeah, and that was a theme that they kind of get looser and looser on over the course of the series, but I really like the fact that Rocky Mountain High does continue to show up as kind of a harbinger of doom, which is hilarious that John Denver's a harbinger of doom.
They do pick it up in one of the later films where you've got Dust in the Wind becomes your repeated. But these films are fantastic for trivia. They love to reference one another.
You mentioned Tony Todd, Frank, and he does have a significant role in this first film, kind of providing some idea of what is happening.
Right, the exposition, right, and it's it's one scene, and it's so memorable. I mean, he brings the juice. I mean, I was lucky. I got to work with him 3 times, so I'm more than just a fan. I considered him a friend, and so pardon me for gushing about him as a talent, but man, I mean, his one scene is just so memorable. And yes, the idea that to say without him, I don't know how you would really get these characters to understand what's happening, right? He merely says death has a design, death is after you guys, and that's good enough but he's just really creepy. That's what he was good at, right? And so is it the first one where he says, "I'll see you soon"? Because I feel like it was a trailer moment, like it's his last line. He says, "I'll see you soon," which just that line, I think in the trailer, if you hadn't seen the movie, you might think that this character is Death, right? So, which is a cool little misdirect.
And I really like the way he's never explained. I mean, this character, we learn that he, is part of the medical examiner's office. But in the first film, he's just calmly there at the mortuary when these 2 kids break in and, "Oh, yeah, you broke in? Fine. I don't care."
Yeah, come look at the body, kids.
Yeah.
And he says he's seen it before. He's seen it all, right? So that's the idea, that he's seen these patterns enough that he's figured it out.
There is something alluded to that is slightly sinister about his character, although he is not Death, which is that there is a film in which after the death, he's seen wearing the character's watch.
Oh.
After one of the characters dies. I believe it's in the second film after the boy who buys all the things with his winnings. He's wearing that character's watch after his death.
I don't remember that.
Which kind of implies a little bit of not necessarily that he's doing anything, with the deaths, but kind of gives him a little bit of a.
But he's a grave robber, basically.
Yeah, I've always just interpreted that as the guy, the dead kid doesn't need the watch anymore.
Right. But we do get introduced to the idea of the creative deaths, and that was something that we absolutely got off on while watching the slasher films from the 80s, and then later in the Scream revival in the 90s. And I feel like this is kind of riffing off of those Scream slasher boom of the late 90s.
Yeah, really, because apparently the first draft of this screenplay, it was with much older characters and was also much more serious in tone. And when then Scream became a real success and all the other slashers that followed, they decided to make something more, for a younger audience with this one.
And I think it really works. We have a variety of creative deaths because, again, that's the thing that we loved. It's like, we're not investing in these characters. What we're looking for is to seeing how they're going to come apart.
There's just one scene that really, it's like above all the others for me, and that's Valerie Luton from the first movie. Because I think that one is really creepy. It's not really a funny scene for me, but it's so drawn out and it's full of fear, and it's so well done. So absolutely, that's my favorite scene. So she sees Devon Sawa outside of her home, and she wrongly believes that he's behind all this, that he's dangerous. So she starts panicking. And then little things start to happen inside her home. Some water is dripping, a glass is breaking, little things. Yeah, for her death is really like a succession of really horrible things, like she's getting knives inside of her, the house burns, like everything you could possibly think of. And it just takes a while for her to die, and she's so in agony. So yeah,
it's hilarious, honey. What's the problem?
Sean William Scott next to the train track. I remember that was such a shocking death for me, because it was the first time that the rules actually, they said, well, they have this theory, if we can stop a death, maybe it jumps that person and goes to the next one, right? But it hadn't been, up to that point, that hadn't been proven theory, right? The murders the deaths are happening in the order that they died on the plane, right? And so it's the other character, the one in the car, who it's his turn to die, right? And so he's feeling a certain kind of way. He parks his car in the train track. The other characters are yelling at him, get off the track, get off the track. And at the last second, he decides to get off the track. And then Sean William Scott's yelling at him, like, I can't take this. There's so much anxiety. And then out of nowhere, the piece of metal flies off the tracks. That was, we talk about how the deaths are paced differently, right? I think that was the first one that was just out of nowhere, really sudden, and we weren't expecting it, because by that point in the movie, we all know that it's that other character's turn to die. So it was when he decided to get himself off the track, death skips him. It's now Sean William Scott's turn, and he gets diced up. That was such a shocking, great twist moment for me.
From the first film, I would go with the girl who got hit by the bus, because it just, bam, it's really, really fast and over with real quick. And after it, as I remember, none of the other characters are really that upset. I mean, she's hit by the bus, then they're coming back from the funeral, and
Carter Horton, he's definitely putting on a show of being upset. That's for sure.
That kid had a lot of emotions he didn't know what to do with. And
that's right. That's right. Big feelings.
I also would acknowledge the Sean William Scott death, since we already talked about that one. I will say, and the death didn't really happen. It was the premonition death of Devon Sawa, where it's just him being consumed by flame. Something about that just taps into my inner ick, where I go, ooh, I don't like that at all.
Fun fact, Billy Hitchcock's death with the train track, where he is partially decapitated, is foreshadowed twice in that film. The first time is when they're standing at the window watching the plane take off. It passes right across his face the same way. Also, when he's fighting with Carter in the car, his cap falls off.
And it happens with other characters as well.
Mm-hmm.
One death I'd like to talk about, I think it's the first movie. It's in the bathroom with the water. She slips and chokes. When I talked about death not being a character, I feel like that's the one death in the whole series where there's something a little more supernatural happening, because you see the water sneak away and go down the drain, as if, I made you slip and now I'm going to go away. So nobody's, and it always kind of bothered me. Like, it felt like, why is the water creeping away? That doesn't feel like the rest of the kills.
Like
to
it's
me.
covering up its tracks.
Yes, exactly.
My understanding with the water receding too is that in original drafts of the script, they did intend for death to be a more sentient, kind of active, kind of covering its tracks. And that was kind of the last thing that remained of that. And they just didn't take it out for some reason.
Also, something that I find interesting and confusing at the same time is for some deaths, you see that there's some kind of presence, a shadow in the room with them. But I really paid attention to this film when I saw it again. And it doesn't happen every time.
I would say that's true. Yeah, it doesn't happen throughout the series. You'll have that kind of gust of wind that comes through, and perhaps a shadow that passes over. But also, then you get things like the bus, where it's just like smash. And
I really went back to see, like, okay, does it happen somewhere that we didn't notice? But no.
Again, we're talking about the slashers of 1980, and this feels like a pretty big progression. We were talking about 20 years later, because this is a bigger budget in terms of the extravagance of the deaths. It's no longer just a knife or an axe or something. It's watching that opening plane sequence is pretty incredible. Like, in terms of the special effects and how it's, wait for it, executed.
I think that's something that allows the series to endure for so long. Effects stand up, like they don't look shitty now compared to what sort of technology we have now. It still looks fantastic. It's
agreed.
Very effective.
And the production values are consistent throughout, even not in just the big special effects scenes, but the whole thing looks good. They're all done up in Vancouver, so they look like all the movies did made back then, but they have a real good polish to them.
The performances are all really solid as well. Like these are good scripts, good performances, good effects, and a really great concept that continues to deliver.
Yeah, undeniably a rinse and repeat franchise, and yet it is my personal top choice of like the best horror film franchise that exists, because there's not a stinker in the bunch. Even if the movie isn't that great, there's going to be at least a couple of deaths that are super fun.
Yep. Yeah, agreed.
And they're all about 90 minutes. So,
well, that's the other thing. I was really impressed. I mean, I just did the Tremors series, and all of those overstay their welcome by about 10 minutes. This one is just like lean and mean. I think the shortest one's 82 minutes. Most of them clock in right around the 90-minute mark. So, yeah, thumbs up to that. Well done, everybody.
And to that, I'm surprised that it took them as long as it has. I know we're going to get to, there's a new one coming out, which we're all super psyched about, but that it took this long because of the rinse and repeat. I know 5 stuck the landing so well, closed the circuit, and so that's probably, there were creative reasons why not to go back too soon. But when does Hollywood make decisions, that are creative decisions? You would think that they would want to keep them coming. I know Tony did. I had conversations with him years before this one was happening, where he would talk to Jeffrey Reddick and say, let's do it again. Come on, what are we waiting for? And it's Hollywood, right?
Do you know if he's in the new one?
He is. It was one of the last things he filmed. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Frank, you had mentioned before about how his role was so memorable. And his character so memorable, and I had forgotten that he was in the movies. And so when I rewatched him for this chat and his name came up in the opening sequence, I was like, I don't remember him in this. And then when he showed up on screen, I was like, oh, Dad. Yeah. It just felt like I wasn't scared. It was just like this warm hug, like, hey.
Yeah, he's a really great guy, really warm personality, a theater trained actor, and could do anything, was often asked to just be scary, actually very versatile actor. He took his craft very seriously.
And out of curiosity, what is your job and the thing you did with him?
So I'm a filmmaker, and so I did 3 films with him. One was a horror comedy where he's like the comedy relief. He actually played an actor's agent, and he did a spoof of an agent that he knew, and so that was really fun. And then I did a cop thriller where he was the bad guy. He's the heavy in that film, and just had a great time. In fact, in that movie, there was a line in the script that says, "I'll see you soon," and he refused to say. He figured out. The screenwriter had slipped it in after knowing that Tony was going to play the part. He just wanted that little what do you call it? An Easter egg, right? And so we're getting to that scene. He's on the phone. He says, "I'll see you soon," but he changed the line around, right? And so he was like, "All right, I'll talk to you tomorrow." And then the script supervisor was like, "Tony, the line is, I'll see you soon." He's like, "No, I'm not saying that." Nice. And then the final movie I did with him was a rom-com, a very different role for him. He was the dad in a rom-com, a former football star. And this script was a movie I was producing, and I was thinking about who could play this dad, because there's a scene where the boyfriend comes over and the dad's supposed to be really intimidating, sort of the get her back by 10, right? And I was like, I wonder if Tony would be interested in this, because I knew that he liked being challenged and doing different types of roles. I remember calling him up and saying, I have another project for you. He's like, what is it? What's the pitch? I said, are you sitting down? He's like, yes. I said, it's a Christmas rom-com. And there was a slight pause, and he said, I've never been offered a rom-com in my life. I'm very intrigued.
What's the title? I want to see it now.
It's called Catfish Christmas. It's adorable. He's wonderful in it. Ella Joyce plays his wife, and the two of them have such great chemistry because the two of them had played husband and wife on stage, I think 20 years earlier, and had been in a few plays together. So he was cast and then she was cast, and they were actually on their way to go do another play right after our film, where they were playing husband and wife again. And so they thought of our film as a nice little warm up to get to be a married couple again. It was wonderful. It's Catfish Christmas. Check it out.
Thanks, Frank. Moving ahead to Final Destination 2, which came out 3 years later, which kind of all of these films in the series are about 3 years apart, with the exception of 4 and 5, which is only 2 years. But in 2003, we get Final Destination 2, which kicks off with arguably the best of the opening set pieces, with that highway pileup thanks to the logging truck coming loose. Then again, it's kind of more of the same in that we have a character who has a premonition of the pileup, and then we zip back. She decides not to get on the on-ramp. We see the explosion occur, and then death chases them down. All the folks that she kept from getting on the highway are pursued by death. But we also have a grouping together of strangers. And I think that's something that's new, in that the first time around, they all knew each other. They were all friends. Here they are strangers. They don't necessarily trust each other. And so we have a different kind of exploration of character dynamics in that regard.
And also the way death works with new life and everything. That's also a new element.
Yes. Yeah. I think we get a couple of different concepts dropped in throughout the series that they don't decide to run with, which I think is kind of fun and also frustrating. You go, wait, you keep changing the rules. It's like, well, who can argue with death? I don't think so.
So Final Destination 2 is the only one, arguably, where the character's theory about how to get out of it actually works.
Right.
Unless you count as canon the DVD extras for the third one, in which those two characters do die. But yeah, that is the only one in which their theory of how to get out of it actually really accomplishes anything, which is kind of fun.
Right, because it concludes with them being alive and the kid blowing up with the barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
Another
don't...
great moment. I love that moment.
That's one of the best scenes in the film. Absolutely.
And that kid avoided death because the guy pushed him out of the way, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So death still wanted him, and he didn't have any new life to offer.
I actually think it's really important that there's one movie in the series where they make it, and because that allows the series to continue with a sense of suspense that, as opposed to it's inevitable, how are they going to die? It's, well, they might get out of it, and so because they survive in 2. Yeah. They're allowed to, at the end of 3, surprise, end of 4, surprise, end of 5, big surprise at the end of 5. But the series can continue to play with whether or not anybody can make it out.
The plot of Final Destination 2, though, has really fun implications for what that means, because the characters of Final Destination 2 are targeted because each of them is only alive because of the deaths of the characters in Final Destination 1. So death has kind of expanded out into the next concentric ring of connection here, which kind of suggests that, what does that imply about the fact that these two characters are still alive? Is every person that interacts with them now destined to die? If they save someone's life, is that going to start a new disaster?
I like you, Kimberly, but not that much.
Right, exactly.
What are some highlights for folks from Final Destination 2 outside of the opening sequence?
That opening is so impressive. I mean, that the way it is choreographed, the original one, pre-premonition, boy, that is put together so well. I remember thinking that the first time I saw it, and then watching it again this time, I just went, wow, these guys really know how to put together a film, and the pacing of it, everything is just so sharp.
And I should mention here that R. Ellis takes over the direction for this one, and he had directed Second Unit, and so he was kind of put in charge of the entire production. And you really see it. I think you're right, Mike. Like, this opening sequence is really, really impressive. And it comes from an idea of somebody who knows how to put an action sequence together.
Maybe one of the best openings even from the entire franchise.
Yeah, but I think this also has some really impressive deaths throughout as well.
Final Destination 2 kind of latches on to something. Like, I give it a lot of credit because the first film has that moment, which is the plane crash, which is kind of the moment of everybody has that feeling, like, what if my plane crashed? The rest of the deaths in that one are a little bit more personal, and, you know, they're all relatable scenarios, but I don't think we're all walking around our house worrying, like, what if my computer explodes and shoots glass in my face? Final Destination 2 kind of picks up a little bit more on that things everyone hates. So for me, my favorite death in that one is definitely Tim. The little boy, the son, who dies right after the dentist, because that scene at the dentist the whole time, you have that feeling of like, I hate the dentist personally. And I think that's really where they get into that. Like, what's something that everyone feels a little bit anxious about going to the dentist? And then ultimately nothing happens to him until he walks outside and painted glass falls on him. It's great.
Yeah. That one and the airbag are my favorites.
Right.
And so the airbag was, I think, kind of what you were talking about, Mike, with the getting pancaked by the bus. Yeah. Is that it just was not expected. There wasn't like, okay, well, as we're cutting into this spot, all of a sudden something bad is going to happen. Nope. It was just like, everything's fine. And then it absolutely wasn't. Yeah, I love that death.
Also, something I thought was really interesting, but I thought the death scene in itself was less well orchestrated, but still interesting. It's Ellie Larter's death, who plays Clear Rivers, because she needs to return in this film. And yeah, huge spoiler alert, but she dies then in the middle of the film. And I thought that was really interesting. I just think it's a pity that, she just blows up and it's finished. And for such a big character, because she was one of the main characters in the first film,
right?
I would have loved seeing it drawn out a little bit more.
I felt like that was a bit of a callback to the first one because the plane exploded. And so she didn't get taken out in that explosion. She got blown up at a hospital. But
well, and I think that is kind of your point, Frank. It points up the unpredictability of it. Is that you think, okay, Ali Larter's going to become our final girl. She's going to become our Neve Campbell, who's going to go through the series. Like, nope, she's not going to. She's done. One of my favorite sequences is the guy who wins the lotto. And that whole sequence in the kitchen, I just find hilarious because it just keeps escalating and escalating and escalating. And a lot of things, you talk about the relatability. I mean, you've had the thing go down the garbage disposal. You've had the thing catch on fire. You've had the microwave that, goes on the fritz, and it just escalates. And then he finally gets out of the apartment and makes it all the way to the ground, has a close call with the fire escape ladder, which then finishes the job. And I think it's a brilliantly choreographed sequence. Makes me laugh.
Also, at least Ali Larter got to die on screen. Poor Alex Browning.
Yes.
He just died between films.
Yeah.
It's a pity. We just hear about it and that's it.
I think that the choice to have them be strangers, which makes a lot of sense with the road disaster and does create a different dynamic than the others, I think that could be related to why we're not feeling as excited about some of the deaths. It's not the deaths themselves are less interesting. It's that because if the characters aren't connected to each other, it's harder for the audience to care, right? So we didn't really get to know the lotto guy very much prior to his hand being stuck in the garbage disposal. So, whereas when they're all friends, there's a lot more, you can have that opening scene prior to the disaster happening, right? Where you just sort of establish connections between characters. This is, basic film stuff where we, the audience, can then relate to them and root for them or not, right? Where there's a lot of characters in this one that we don't really get to know because we're seeing it from the main character's perspective. We sort of see them on the highway. We don't really get to know them.
And then we have two other deaths in this that we haven't mentioned. They are flying barbed wire fence that sections our stoner.
That's a great scene.
And I love that guy. He's a real piece of shit, and I love him.
And then we have our beheading of the woman with her head stuck in the elevator.
That was a good one.
Which is a pretty gruesome death as well. This may be my favorite of the 5 films. I think it holds together quite well. I think it provides enough connective tissue between the first and the second. I like that it introduces a new mythology, even if they don't necessarily stick with it moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, let's talk about Final Destination 3, which is the roller coaster one. We have Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who pre-stardom. She's our person who has the premonition of a roller coaster that's going to go kaplooey, and kaplooey it goes. She gets herself off the roller coaster, takes a few folks with her, then the roller coaster goes kerplooey, and then death starts chasing. What are people's thoughts on Final Destination 3?
Final Destination 3 is actually my favorite of the opening sequences. I absolutely love the roller coaster. Also, Tony Todd, although he's not in this film, does provide the voice of the roller coaster, so he does get a little moment. But I love the roller coaster. The character of Wendy, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, she kind of has this whole thing with control, and I relate to that a lot, and that's why I hate roller coasters. I hate being strapped into something that I can't get out of. So that one really stuck with me, and it also has my favorite death of the whole franchise, which I think is a lot of people's favorites, which are Ashlyn and Ashley in the tanning beds. Also, Final Destination 3 introduces the idea of the photographs that she's able to review, which I actually like to think about, like maybe that did exist in the first 2, but they never figured it out.
Right. If only someone had taken pictures.
Right. Or maybe there was some kind of, maybe death was cluing them into something a little bit more, but they just didn't get there.
And 3 does have my favorite line of dialogue in the whole series. If they are up there in heaven with Lincoln and Gandhi, do they care about graduation?
That's a valid question. Yeah, I like the engine death. The truck hits in the drive-through and just goes into the back of the guy's head. It's beautiful.
Definitely the tanning bed scene for me. That's one of the best in the entire series. It's really funny, and also with the song that's playing, Roller Coaster, not just the title, but I don't know. It's a really catchy scene, and yeah.
What makes me laugh is that they're bopping out to this song Roller Coaster when a few days ago most of their friends died on a roller coaster. That's what makes that scene work.
But a good one.
I feel like that scene too is a bit more of a love note to traditional slashers, because it's the nudity and then they die topless. So
yeah, we don't get much nudity in this series, which I'm impressed by. It's like but that does feel like it's as gratuitous as it gets, and I think knowingly so.
Very much.
One of the things is, speaking of the tanning beds, this has my favorite jump cut in the entire series, and perhaps maybe my top of all time, where it cuts from the tanning beds to the grave sites and just goes kablam. I was like, that was genius. I'm like, where's my notes? I have to write that down. That was so good.
I was very impressed that they were able to get plots next door to each other. How nice.
Right? Well, they may have booked them ahead of time because they knew they were besties.
And something else interesting about the song that's playing during the tanning bed scene, the roller coaster song, there was for a while like an urban legend going on around that song, because if you listen really well to that song, you can hear someone scream in the background. And many people were convinced that it was someone who was murdered. And of course, yeah.
They reference that same urban legend in the movie Urban Legends 2.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, but it does come up in that one.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of songs, I mean, this one that does kind of revisit that theme of a music, a song being the harbinger, because we have the Bee Gees, someone walking behind you, and that shows up a couple of times throughout this movie, not consistently, but it consistently enough that we can make it part of the mythology. This is also where we get to, similar to the Val Luton, similar to our Lotto winner, where it's very much about suspense. We are waiting to see how it's going to happen, and misdirection. We start seeing, is it going to happen here? And then something will happen, sideways. And we start really playing into that on this one. The example I think of is in the garden housewares area, where there's all these things that could take someone out, and then it ends up being the nail gun.
I think of that with the weight room, right? Because the the swords, like,
Yeah.
oh my God. And just what a beautiful scene. I laugh every time I watch that. I remember I watched that as part of, like, I was doing a marathon with a couple other people, and that scene came on and we were just laughing so hard. And then all of a sudden one of us in the room just goes, "What's a brewin'?"
Final Destination 3 has a lot of callbacks to the first one, but also kind of continues a fun trend, which is the movies continually reference presidents who were assassinated.
Yes.
Oh, sure.
The first film, they all attend Mount Abraham High School. This one, they're all in McKinley. Then they're all attending the McKinley ceremony for their town bicentennial.
And McKinley is played by Chris Lemke, who's one of my favorite Canadian genre actors. He shows up in a lot of stuff, including the first Ginger Snaps film. It was nice to see him swing back in front of the camera for this one. This is definitely one where we go, water is not your friend, and electric's just bad news. But because the effects are so well done, I find myself, I'm invested in the scenario as opposed to wondering how they did that. I think that really speaks to the effectiveness of the drama that's on screen and the effectiveness of the special effects, is that we aren't thinking, well, how'd they do that? We're just thinking, oh, what a great death.
They do manage also in this film to insert a little plot twist, which you don't really expect from these movies too much because, they are kind of formulaic and you think death's coming for people. But at the end, when she realizes it's her sister, because she sees her bracelet, that actually does manage to kind of take you by surprise in a movie that's not really about plot twists like that.
Right. Yeah. It's less about plot, period, right? It's just kind of like how this is going to play out.
Especially with a lot of the stuff, like Aaron was mentioning about the water. It looked to me like that was a practical thing done with real liquid of some kind.
Watching these films, it does feel like they really do try to go practical when they can. Yeah.
Well, and the finale of this one, I thought was pretty incredible with the subway crash, where it basically takes out 4 major characters in one fell swoop in a really, really splattery way. Like people like being pushed halfway out windows and getting sprayed across the inside of the tunnel.
The ending of that movie frustrates me because the premonition, she's not able to do anything about it. So as opposed to every other, when there are premonitions, it's like allows you to get off, right? Or to change something. But her premonition happened so that we're able to get all the murders, and then it zoops back to her, but it's already past the last stop. And that really frustrated me. Like, I wish it had been, she snaps back and it's prior to the other guy getting on, and she's really trying to get off and everyone's trying to calm her down, and that's why she said, that's the one note that I would have for this movie.
Death, you're not being fair.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Come on, Death.
Really mean of you to do that.
Some of these movies really make you wonder if you were in that situation, would you kind of wish you had just died on the plane crash?
rather than knowing it was coming after you.
No, it was coming and then having some horrible, or died on the roller coaster instead of being, cut in half on a subway train.
The thing with this one, with the photographs, it doesn't work if you think too much about it, because weren't they all supposed to die on the roller coaster? Therefore, how are there clues to their second death in the photograph? I'm like, okay, you know what? It's just a movie, and at some point you got to just go with it, right?
Well, and we should probably call out that The Omen kind of did that a little bit before, like 1976. We have photographs where we see things that are showing how people are going to die. And I love the fact that they are bringing that forward and borrowing that. I think it's a great bit of homage rather than a ripoff. Moving ahead to Final Destination 4, which is the Final Destination. It feels like it wanted to be the Final Destination. What are people's thoughts on Final Destination, the Final Destination, 2009?
Well, I think there's a lot of things wrong with the Final Destination, special effect, humor, opening scene. But at the same time, I don't hate the film because there's still a lot of good scenes in there, and it stays enjoyable. So, and even maybe some of the best scenes again from the series, like the thing in the cinema, for example. I really loved that. The car wash scene, the I think the laser surgery is also this one, right?
Yeah.
So many great scenes, but also, a lot of things wrong with it.
The one thing that sticks with me as like an enjoyable moment was seeing it in the theater in 3D.
Mhm.
And there's a scene at the pool. And so the shot is underwater, and there's just a little Band-Aid that comes across the screen, and it scared the shit out of me because I wasn't expecting it. And so I'm like, I've never had another Band-Aid scare. So into it.
Well, and I will say the timing for this one was good because 3D was making a big comeback at the time. And I can't think of a better series in which things could be thrown at the viewer with abandon as much as the Final Destination series. And we do see it a lot. I think a lot of these effects are done kind of in the coming at you style and done really well. Like you mentioned the pool, like, that explosion that comes up toward the camera, the explosion in the theater that comes right toward the camera. I feel like they really leaned into that, and we were in a place where technology could make that happen.
As much as I want to dislike this movie, because it almost, I think it did almost kill the franchise, is my understanding, because it was not well received. And yes, it is very silly in a lot of ways. I can't because of that escalator. That escalator scene is so good.
Yep. Going back to that thing of like, this is all stuff that we see and we're afraid of, or we have like weird intrusive thoughts about, and it just plays into that. Love that shit.
I think that one of the things this movie does, maybe because they were at a racetrack at the beginning, but there's a lot of unlikable characters.
Right.
So like there's racists and jerks and I'm sure they did that so that the fans could root for really awesome deaths. But someone had earlier said, these movies are a mix of people we like and people we don't like. And I think this one, part of what went a little off the tracks with this one was they went a little too far with characters who were just really not nice. Oh, you do have the racist who gets dragged down the street, right? That's a really fun death.
That is satisfying to watch.
I think these characters are really thin, and pretty. Like, that's what I was like. Yes, like everybody is. It's basically kind of a cartoon at this point. And I feel like they had realized that maybe they were running out of steam in terms of new ideas. And so they just kind of leaned into the cartooniness of it. It's funny because according to Wikipedia, this is the installment that made the most money of all of them. And maybe that was because of the inflated ticket prices for the 3D. But, the idea that it was not successful, it's like, I think it's not as successful as a film, but clearly it made a lot of money at the box office. But also we get introduced the idea of our main character having premonitions in the middle of the thing. Like he has premonitions of how people are going to die in the real world, post a big accident.
I don't dislike the film, but it is my least favorite of the five.
Yeah, I would say that is true for me as well.
I think that the explanation for why it's making more money is the series was picking up fans as it went. Like you said, a lot of people like, oh, I've been hearing about this movie, that every time there's a new movie comes out, somebody's going to go, I got to check in on this series.
Right. You can't walk into it, right? You don't need to have seen the other films to enjoy the latest installment. Yep.
And they were bringing them out on DVD and special editions, and given a lot of play that way. I think that may also have had something to do with the increased popularity by the time they got to number 4.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this one's definitely, somebody was talking earlier about the practical effects. I think it was you, Mike. Like, this one feels very CG heavy.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it is. And it actually kicks off with those opening credits, kind of like the X-ray version of deaths from previous films, which I think is a really fun way to like bring people back in and remember, oh, that's right, that was really cool in number 2, and that was really cool in the first one. But yeah, it does. I just overall it feels cartoon, like our character of Hunt, our big jock dude. He's just the worst, and you're just waiting for him to get it, and he finally gets it in a pretty satisfying way. Any favorite deaths from this one? We mentioned a few.
Surgery. Because even if nothing happened, just the fact that she got eye surgery and it went completely wrong, for me, that's something that's really, really terrifying. I should get eye surgery like this, but I don't want to anymore.
For me, it's the car wash.
Yeah.
Also,
And she doesn't even die in that one, but it's a great sequence.
Yeah.
I love the Chuck Palahniuk pool death. That's just a gross one, I think. And then the fact that the blood sprays out of the pool filter, like this, I'll say this movie gets points for being the grossest of the franchise.
Yeah, we really have to admit that the death scenes here, they are really memorable.
There's the one guy who gets like pushed through the chain link fence, and you just see like, pieces of him kind of like fall out. And then that one concludes with our truck through the cafe window, which we again go back to the X-ray of seeing people being crushed to death, which my wife walked in on. She's like, "This is terrible," and then she walked out again. So it was not the way to convince her that these films were worthwhile.
I don't think you're going to change her mind.
I was going to say, this is not going to be her bang. A brief 2 years before we get into Final Destination 5, which went back to numbers. They're like, I guess this isn't the Final Destination. Let's go back to numbers. But this one is directed by Stephen Quale, who's making his big screen directing debut. And it's scripted by Eric Hesserer, who did the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, the Thing prequel, and the Lights Out expansion of the short film. So not my favorite films. However, I think he does a really fine job here with this script. This is the one that kicks off with the suspension bridge coming apart, which is the longest and most extravagant opening. What are people's thoughts about Final Destination 5?
I recognize the Lionsgate Bridge, and because I'd been over it several times, and that made it pretty scary to me.
Yes, this one was also based on a very specific real-world bridge collapse.
Is the one that also Mothman Prophecies was based on, right?
Mm-hmm. Final Destination 5 is my favorite of the franchise. The first time I saw it, and then, again, not to spoil, I guess this is full of spoilers, but when you get to the end of that film and you realize it's a prequel and they're all getting on the plane, I was just ecstatic with that. And when you watch it again, you get to find so many things that you guarantee you did not see the first time, which tell you the whole time. All their cell phones are too old. All the technology in the film is too old. But also you see the logging truck that causes the disaster in Final Destination 2 is on the bridge. They see the race car early in the film that causes the disaster in the Final Destination. They see one of the women, Olivia, who dies in the film. She has a picture on her desk of her on the roller coaster from Final Destination 3. And it's not really until you watch it again that you kind of appreciate, the movie's kind of giving you these little hints the whole time. I love it. Also kind of implies that it's their fault that the whole thing happened. Death was really just after them and killed a whole plane full of people, which kind of caused the sequence of events for the rest of it. So again, we have a way out of death that doesn't work in this movie. Right. They think that they have the solution. It doesn't happen. It's just great. I love it.
And this one is my favorite because Tony's back and he has 3 scenes, which is 2 more scenes than he got in any previous film. Ludworth.
And when he says, I've seen this before in the first movie, is he referring to the events of Final Destination? I love to think about the implications for history of this. How many horrible disasters in history in the Final Destination world were just like death leading up after. It's like you go back to the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire or something, and like that's going to be a Final Destination movie.
And I don't know. I noticed this. I checked the credits to make sure I had this right, and I bet it follows through for all the films. There were 51 names in the stunt crew, 30 in the speaking cast. So
yeah, these are very much action films. This is another one that was done in 3D, and I really like the opening credits for this one as well. A lot of stuff is flying through glass, which is then coming out at the audience, and we have all these kind of like different implements of destruction. I just feel like that's a really great way to kind of get everybody in the mood. But yeah, what are some people's highlights from this film?
Oh, the balance beam, the little screw on the balance beam. That whole thing is just so elaborate. I think that may be the most elaborate of all of them in the series. You think of all the different things that are going on in that scene. It's just really remarkable.
And the misdirection is wonderful because you keep thinking she's going to land on it. and then she gets away and she doesn't step into the electrified puddle and then when it does come, you're like, oh, of course that's how it was going to go.
That was a really fun one to see in theaters because there was a lot of screaming every time she's jumping near that little spike. Everybody kept waiting for it, and the misdirection is just wonderful.
And then the actual death is just endlessly enjoyable and hilarious to me. Yeah. Isn't that a scene in like Friday the 13th part 6 or 7 where the cop gets folded in half?
Well, yeah, I mean that's one of my favorites from that franchise is that death there.
That's a great scene too for, maybe not the most relatable to people having actually experienced it, because how many of us have been like high level gymnasts, but relatable for the fact that every time you watch gymnastics, a part of you is kind of like, someone's going to be horribly injured.
Yeah. And I always feel that watching gymnasts. I mean, I think about when we see them in competition, like they're doing it flawlessly. I'm like, how many times did they fall off that damn thing in practice to get here? I have so much respect for gymnasts. Here, I want you to talk about the 180s that show up throughout the series, because that was another one at our trivia. Wait, where? It shows up there as well? And as I was watching this time, I had you on my shoulder going, there it is, there it is, there it is. So.
Yeah, I was just thinking to myself, someday at trivia, we're going to do Final Destination, and anybody who has watched or listens to this is going to have a huge advantage.
Yes.
There are a lot of kind of things that pop up, kind of recurring motifs in the Final Destination world. One of them is Height Beer, which is a fictional beer brand, which is named after a member of the crew. It shows up on a truck. But yeah, the number 180 obviously refers to Flight 180, but it's everywhere in the Final Destination series. Shows up on the window of the bus. I believe the company that they're going on the retreat for is like 180 Career Consulting or something like that. Shows up in the cafe where he works, which is also the same name as the cafe where the 3 characters are eating at the end of the first Final Destination. It's reversed at one point for one of the characters. But yeah, it's will definitely become part of my Final Destination tattoo someday.
Well, I think the train that she's on at the end of Final Destination 3 is 180. They're in section 180 at the racetrack.
I think originally the title of Final Destination 1 was going to be Flight 180, but there had been a few too many kind of airplane-related films coming out at the time, so they ended up changing it. But
and I think it's a great title, Final Destination. I think, and I love the fact that it's gone on as long as it has.
Well, imagine, I'm thinking it would have never gotten 5 sequels if it was called Flight 180 Part 5. You'd really, you would really sort of, you'd be in a pickle.
And we have as you mentioned, we have our Dust in the Wind, musical motif that returns. Any other favorite deaths from this one?
Acupuncture.
Yep.
Because I'm not a fan. PJ Byrne plays the womanizer. He's a buddy of mine. We went to college together.
He's so goddamn funny. Please tell him.
And so, but then he ends up getting the Buddha statue crushing his head. So another one with great misdirection.
Yeah. It's a great scene. Yeah. Really funny.
I love the final death in which the engine of Flight 180 falls and crashes.
Yeah. The airplane wheel from the sky.
Yeah.
Because the guy who he took the death, because this introduces the mythology that if you murder somebody and they die instead of you, then it will skip you. It only skips you for so long as that person was going to live.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the guy that ends up dying in his place only had a few days to live, and so I think it's a great way to wrap up the series.
When they announced the new Final Destination Bloodlines, which is the new one coming out, I was a little bit, I'm very excited, but a part of me was bummed because in the back of my head, I had been working on a Final Destination script for a sequel. And I was like, we should follow these people that just steal other people's lifetime. Yep. That would make a great sequel. Just someone who survived a disaster sequence, they just stay alive by stealing someone else's time.
Or it could be a TV series. I mean, like there's some mileage to be had here. And I do have to just say, our character of Peter, has there been a walking, talking deep fake of Tom Cruise ever so skillfully executed?
Holy shit. Yeah.
People are like, is that Tom Cruise? Is that
You
Tom
really look alike. No, Tom Cruise was too expensive for this film.
And too old.
No, but he is the actor who is known for the famous deep fake of Tom Cruise.
Right.
That is him. That is him with Tom Cruise's face put over him. So he's made something of a career for himself of doing Tom Cruise.
That's great.
I believe it.
If you could come up with like a really cool opening sequence for one of the next Final Destination movies, what would you pick?
I think Final Destination 8, after they do Bloodlines, it's got to be in Las Vegas. Games of chance, and then what we're going to have is a really great like a casino collapse or a stage collapse at like a Cirque du Soleil.
Nice.
That's what I envision. And maybe like a giant fish tank explodes.
Yeah.
I would do something on top of a skyscraper in New York. One of those new ones they've got now that are, ridiculous. They're needles that are kind of tiny, but, very, very tall.
I think I would go for like a tsunami or an earthquake or something.
I was in Palm Springs recently. They have this funicular that goes up the mountain, and so you're in this little cabin, and you're being held way up high by this tiny little cable. And I'm sitting in there, and my life is in the hands of this tiny little cable. I just kept waiting for it to snap, going, well, if this is it, at least I'm going to have a spectacular view on the way down. So that would be my opening.
Good. Ashley?
I have no fucking idea. I'm so sorry. I was like, I was thinking if it could involve animals, I would be into it. But
Ashley, I was totally going to say a zoo. Like, where like the animals get loose and, we get trampled by elephants and we get drowned by walruses and, big cats biting people to death. I would love to see that, especially because it could be done now with CG in a way that wouldn't be as cartoony.
Yeah.
If we're talking about things that just give you anxiety all the time, it'd have to be a parking garage.
Oh,
parking garage.
That collapses.
Every time in Los Angeles that I was down, 3 or 4 levels deep, I was like, I'm getting trapped down here.
Cool. Let's circle back around. Final thoughts on the Final Destination series. And thank you all so much for your contributions today.
While I was watching this, and I went ahead and bought the DVD set so that I could, really take a good look at them in my own time without trying to stream them or anything like that. I will not go into a rant against streaming, but I could. But while I was watching these, I came across a quote from Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic philosopher and Roman emperor, who said, "Death smiles at us all. All a man can do is smile back." And that pretty much sums up how I, approach this, and still makes a lot of sense.
I'm smiling right now. Ashley.
I could watch this franchise probably any day of the week with any group of people. It is fun, easy to sit through. It's easy to enjoy.
Frank.
I want to share a real quick story from Jeffrey Reddick, the creator, that he told me, because after it was turned down from X-Files, he turned it into a feature spec script and was pitching it around before it landed in the home it was. He was able to take a meeting with a big studio. This would have been a big deal for him. And he's there and he's pitching it to the suits, right? They hated it. They laughed him out the door. They said, why does he have the premonition? They were asking all these questions that he didn't have answers for. He says, well, it's science fiction. Science fiction doesn't need explanations for everything. Well, at the time he was pitching it, The Sixth Sense was the #1 movie in the country. And so these suits said, well, Sixth Sense is science fiction. And by the end of the movie, everything is explained. And Jeffrey Reddick said, why does the kid see dead people? And they kicked him out of the office.
How dare you, sir?
How dare you? But so not everyone had the foresight to know what a genius idea for a movie it was. But we are as fans of the series, we're very fortunate that someone said yes, and these movies did come into fruition.
Awesome, thank you, Vanessa.
I'm going to say the same as Ashley. I think it's so enjoyable, and you can really watch like the 5 movies in a row. And even though they're basically the same story and concept, you won't get bored. You can really watch them all 5 one right after the other, and it stays enjoyable and it stays fun, and definitely recommend it.
And Ciara.
I think Final Destination, the true brilliance is that at the end of the day, this is a film franchise about fear. And that's relatable for any person who has ever had any experience. Everybody has felt nervous, has felt anxious, has had intrusive thoughts about what if this happens. And that's what makes Final Destination unique and brilliant. And I think also would allow it to go so many interesting places in the future. You know, unlike a lot of film franchises, I would watch a Final Destination movie in the past. I would watch one where they go to space. I would watch, they could do it. They could do it well. It could be really interesting, and I'd be seeing it.
Well, thank you all so much. It was a fantastic conversation, and looking forward to having you all on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.